By the time word got out, everything had already been waiting for 7 months. Men had abandoned jobs, ships had lost their crews, and fortunes were already changing hands before most Americans living east of the Mississippi knew anything had even happened in California. But then on August 19th of 1848, the New York Herald printed the report that would help turn a distant discovery into a national obsession. The story sounded like the beginning of a fantasy, but the delay was real. The gold was real. And the people who arrived late would pay dearly for every month that they had lost out. Join me today as I follow the secret from a quiet mill beside the American River to the newspaper pages that finally told the East Coast the future had already begun without them. On January 24th of 1848, James W. Marshall stood beside the trail race of a lumber mill under construction near Coloma, California, and noticed something shining in the moving water beside him. The mill belonged to John Sutter, who was a businessman who hoped to build a large agricultural settlement in a territory still passing through the final uncertainty of war and political transfer. Marshall examined this material and brought it to Sutter himself. They tested it privately. The result was unmistakable. It was gold. Sutter understood immediately that this discovery might destroy everything that he had planned. He did not imagine a tidy line of disciplined workers carefully mining around his crops and respecting his property. Oh no. He imagined laborers bailing out and leaving, strangers arriving, and control absolutely disappearing. He was correct in every way. The men involved here were asked to keep the discovery a secret, but secrecy becomes fragile when the secret can be weighed, traded, and carried in a pocket, especially when that secret is something this valuable. My mother used to say, a secret can be kept as long as, what was it she said? The only way a secret can be kept is between two people is if one of them is dead. Yeah, there were a lot of people involved in this secret. So the first failures came really kind of quietly. Mr. Charles Bennett was sent to Monterey to ask officials about mineral rights connected to the mill property. His purpose was to protect Sutter's claim before outsiders understood what had been found. Bennett was not supposed to discuss the gold, but yet he mentioned it during the journey and again after reaching San Francisco. The information moved from conversation to conversation, not quickly by modern standards because they didn't have cell phones and internet, but it was quickly enough to become quite dangerous. By March, Samuel Brannan, a merchant and newspaper publisher, had confirmed that the stories were true. Brannan understood something that most prospectors would learn a little bit too late. A person did not need to find gold to profit from a gold rush. He purchased mining supplies, carried a vial of gold through San Francisco, and publicly announced that gold had been found along the American River. That's right. He purchased the gold in his pocket. He was not just spreading news, he was creating customers. The effect was immediate, of course. Workers left their jobs and businesses closed, and sailors deserted ships in the harbors and headed inland. People who had never mined anything in their lives started gathering up pans and shovels and blankets and whatever food they believed they could carry. Some traveled with practical plans, while others traveled with little more than just a belief that their own confidence counted as the equipment that they would need, and they would dig it out with their bare hands. San Francisco briefly lost as many residents as crewmen that ships remained abandoned along the waterfront. San Francisco basically lost its dang mind. Some of those vessels were eventually converted into warehouses, some of the ones that were abandoned. And some of them were later turned into taverns and hotels and stores, and one of them was even turned into a jail. The city did not just grow around the gold rush. It began rebuilding itself from the remains of the sudden departure of all these people. The first people to reach the gold fields possessed an advantage that could never, ever be recreated. Gold was in stream beds and gravel deposits where it could just be sometimes collected by plucking it out, or with simple tools or very little experience. Some prospectors earned in a day what an Eastern laborer might struggle to earn over many weeks or even months. Others gathered amounts that would have represented years of ordinary wages. The stories that came from the region sounded absolutely impossible because, for a brief period, some of them nearly were. A person could kneel down beside a river in the morning to wash their face and possess a small fortune by nightfall. That possibility did not make success very common, but it made restraint really quite difficult. Gold fever did not require proof of guaranteed wealth. It only required one believable story about someone who had found it. Even today, gold fever can exist in some people. One of the most recent gold rushes was in 2021, I believe. And a whole lot of people flocked to a very small territory to strip all the gold out of this area. But the first ones there were the ones who got all the money. So news travels outward through ships and merchants and letters and travelers, but the United States was still it was a country divided by enormous distances and massive mountains called the Rockies and slow communication. There was no telegraph that was crossing the entire continent yet, no railroad connecting California to the East Coast yet, no reliable way for discovery near Coloma to reach New York within hours or even days. People in Oregon, Hawaii, Mexico, Chile, Peru often heard sooner because the ships connected them more directly than the East Coast connected to California. By the end of 1848, thousands of people from those regions were already moving toward the mining country. They were inundated with people. They were swarming. Fewer than 500 people crossed overland from the eastern United States that year. That's not very many. For most Eastern Americans, California remained distant and uncertain, dangerous, and almost surely abstract. Meanwhile, the easiest gold was being removed from the rivers, one pan, one little pluck at a time. On August 19th of 1848, the New York Herald finally brought this discovery to the major East Coast audience. The newspaper had become one of the most successful publications in the United States by understanding that readers wanted information presented with urgency and drama. Yet they're the ones that started that. Anyway, its publisher, James Gordon Bennett Sr., believed that a newspaper should startle and amuse rather than just merely instruct and educate. The California report required very little embellishment. Gold had been discovered. Men were leaving their jobs and lives for this. A distant territory was changing faster than the nation could understand. Yet the most remarkable part of the story was not just what happened, it was how long it had taken for millions of Americans to even hear about it in the first place. And when history happens across continents without really vast communication, the people who receive the news are not witnessing the beginning of something amazing. They're being informed that they already missed it. The Herald's report did not instantly send every reader toward California. No, of course not. This was 1848. We've all heard of the 49ers, right? Well, where do you think they get their name from? Wasn't from 1848, I'll tell you. So many people remained skeptical, and reasonably so. Stories of sudden wealth have ways of they've always attracted exaggeration and fraud and wishful thinking. You know, you don't hear about people getting rich overnight and instantly think, oh, they must have worked really hard for that. California was far away. It was difficult to reach. And only recently was it brought under American control following the war with Mexico. I know I'm going to get some debates on that one in the comments. Don't debate me on this one. I probably know more of the history than most of you. But traveling there required serious money and a willingness to accept dangers that could not be dismissed as just minor inconveniences. A person could sail around Cape Horn all the way down, around, and underneath South America on a journey covering thousands of miles and lasting several long, brutal months. There's one part down there around the bottom of Cape Horn that if you don't catch it at the exact right moment, you're almost guaranteed to have a shipwreck, even now. Anyway, another could maybe travel to Panama, cross the isthmus through difficult terrain on foot, and wait for transportation north along the Pacific coast. It might have taken just as long to just sail around Cape Horn. But the third option was an overland journey across rivers and mountains and plains where illness or injury or fights and battles could become fatal before any kind of help arrived. No route was easy, and no promise of gold could ever make it safe. But still, the report changed the emotional distance between California and the East Coast. What had once sounded like scattered rumor now appeared in a major newspaper that people trusted. Yes, people actually trusted newspapers back then. The possibility of wealth became something readers could hold in their hands and discuss across breakfast tables, inside taverns, and at places of work. Men began calculating the cost of travel. Families considered separation, and many, many families did separate over this. Merchants thought about supplies. Some readers probably discussed the entire affair as another sensational newspaper story that nobody was going to believe, while others just began planning how they were going to leave, especially those who were planning to leave their wife and children behind in hopes of making and finding enough gold to be able to bring their family out, or for them to return to the East Coast and to support their family for the remainder of existence. And a lot of them never even made it to the West Coast. But they did not yet know that President James K. Polk would confirm the discovery to Congress in December. They did not know that the following year would bring tens of thousands of travelers from across the United States and around the world. They only knew that gold had been found. Other people were already collecting it, and every day spent deciding might mean arriving maybe one day too late. When President Polk confirmed the discovery of gold before Congress on December 5th of 1848, the last major cloud of doubt began to completely disappear. What had sounded to some like an exaggerated newspaper story cooked up by, somebody wanting to sell their paper, suddenly carried the weight of the President of the United States. By then, however, California had already changed beyond recognition. Those who had reached the rivers early had spent months exploring the stream beds and staking claims and learning where fortunes could still be found. Some of them had even started venturing deeper into the mountains and digging holes. Those reading Polk's word in distant towns and cities faced a painful recognition and realization. They were no longer deciding whether to join the gold rush. They were deciding how much of it they'd already missed. Yet the possibility remains intoxicating. Even if the richest gravel had already been gathered from the easiest of places, enough stories continued reaching the East Coast to convince thousands that their own fortune was still out there waiting for them just somewhere beyond the horizon. The year 1849 became one of the greatest voluntary migrations in American history. Tens of thousands of people packed their belongings up, said difficult goodbyes, and began journeys that tested every measure of endurance that they possessed. Some sailed thousands of miles around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. It was a voyage that could consume 4 or 5 months. Others crossed the Isthmus of Panama through exhausting heat before boarding yet another ship on the Pacific coast. Many chose the overland trails, facing deserts and swollen rivers and disease and accidents and broken wagons and failing livestock Simple exhaustion, the Rocky Mountains, natives who didn't want them there. The journey itself claimed thousands and countless lives before California ever came into view. Families were separated. Friendships were tested. Dreams were measured not only against distance, but against survival. Every traveler understood there was no guarantee that gold would still be waiting when they arrived. For those who finally reached California, reality often proved far more complicated than imagination did. Some of the earliest arrivals truly did recover astonishing amounts of gold using little more than pans and cradles and simple tools. A fortunate few became genuinely wealthy in remarkably short periods of time. Those stories spread across newspapers because the extraordinary successes make irresistible reading. They still do. People who think that they want to just all of a sudden drop everything and be an influencer online are only doing it because they know of the very few extraordinary success stories, because they make irresistible stories. What rarely receives equal attention were the thousands who found only modest amounts or nothing at all, or the millions who try to be influencers now and don't get more than maybe a handful of views. So anyway, these people spent their savings on food and equipment and lodging and transportation while competing against an ever-growing population of prospectors, searching for the exact same streams and the exact same dreams. The dream remained alive because enough people succeeded to keep hope burning, even while many others quietly packed their belongings and wondered how they would afford the trip home. Ironically, some of the greatest fortunes created by the California Gold Rush were never dug up from the ground. Samuel Brennan, who had helped to spread the news in California, earned enormous amounts of wealth by selling mining supplies before rushing the rivers himself. Merchants opened stores and boarding houses filled with paying customers. Ships owners charged premium fares to be able to transport people. Transportation companies expanded rapidly. Blacksmiths and builders and cooks and laundresses and countless other businesses. They discovered that people chasing gold required food and clothing and shelter and repairs and shoes and equipment every single day. While miners gambled against chance, many merchants built fortunes through consistency and things that they knew were going to be reliably needed. It became one of history's clearest reminders that opportunity often belongs not only to those chasing the treasure, but to those serving the people who do. Think about Levi Strauss. I did an episode on him, a couple of months ago now. His story starts in the gold rush and ends with him being a millionaire. But the transformation reached far beyond California. The sudden flow of gold strengthened the American economy. It accelerated California's admission as the 35th state. In 1850, it encouraged new roads and schools and churches and businesses, and eventually helped to finance transportation projects that would tie the continent together. The gold rush helped to pay for the Transcontinental Railroad. San Francisco exploded from a tiny little settlement into one of America's greatest cities back then within only a few years. Steamship companies expanded. Trade increased across the Pacific. Communities around the world supplied food and clothing and machinery and goods to meet California's endless demands. A single discovery in a mill race beside the American River had quietly begun reshaping economies across entire continents. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of the story is not the gold itself. Gold has always existed somewhere beneath the soil, waiting with complete indifference, as inanimate objects do, just for someone to notice it. What changed the world was information. 7 months separated the discovery at Sutter's mill from the moment millions of Americans first learned about it through the pages of the New York Herald. 7 months allowed fortunes to be made and opportunities to disappear and history to move forward and ahead, while much of the nation still remained completely unaware that it had already changed. Today, we receive news almost instantly and still struggle to keep pace with it. In 1848, entire futures could be completely transformed before the headline even arrived. Sometimes the greatest distance in history is not measured in miles. It's measured in how long it takes the truth to reach the people who need to hear it. And if you're a fan of the old black and white movies, you may have noticed that there was a massive spike of gold rush movies that popped out in the 1930s. The reason for that was largely because a lot of the people who had been born or were young during this amazing 1849 gold rush were starting to die off. They were very old at that point. They were in their 80s or their 90s. But as they were starting to die off, they had these incredible stories that they wanted to share. You know, if you are a fan of talking to the elderly, you know they have these incredible stories. Well, as their stories started to circulate, Hollywood started to take notice. And it brought about people who made wonderful films, such as Clark Gable and Mae West and Cary Grant, Bob Hope. Some of my favorite movies are of the American Gold Rush. And they were made in the 1930s. They're wonderful movies. Absolutely wonderful. That's actually how Cary Grant got his start in the movies, in part thanks to Mae West. But if you had been living on the East Coast in August of 1848, would you have risked everything the second you saw that headline to chase your own story that was, chase this gold on a story that was already 7 months old? Or would you have waited for Polk's announcement that, yes, it was real? Or would you have stayed home with your family on the East Coast? Let me know what you have done in the comments. I love this story. I love the adventure. I love the spirit of it. But even I don't know what I would have done back then. I really don't. I've gone gold panning. I have found mountains that have gold sprinkled all throughout them. I found it in riverbeds. I have found gold nuggets. And I did have gold fever for a little while. But I don't know if I would have uprooted my entire life to go and find it again. At the time, all I did was spend a day. But hey, if you enjoy stories like this, please take a moment to follow the History Happens with Amanda Blackwood Facebook page for more deep dives into history's most fascinating moments like this. And subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, because you never know what I'm going to be covering next. The last few days have been rather dark, so I'm grateful for this little upbeat change. Thanks for watching.